All right, let's talk in this session about a foundation of Christian education. In the previous session, we looked roughly from 1950 up into the late 60s. And of course, then we brought the mission program all the way current. But in this session, I want to look primarily at the mid-70s up until maybe through the 1990 or thereabouts. But the theme is on Christian education. And so let's talk about that. And again, before we get started, let me give you our leadership just to set a framework for who's in charge of the Church of God Mountain Assembly. These are our general overseers during this period of time that we're talking about. Ansel Jerome Walden was born August the 15th, 1933 in Jellicoe, Tennessee, to James Walden and Edna Douglas Walden. He was saved at the Kipling Avenue Church in Cleveland, Ohio, where his father was pastoring in 1954. Within a year, he began preaching. He was ordained in 1958 by the Reverends Ira Moses, Charles Creekmore, and his father, James Walden Sr. He pastored Cleveland's West Side Church, pioneered a church in Elyria, Ohio, and then followed his father in the pastorate at Kipling Avenue Church, and then later moved the church to Aspinwall Avenue, where it's at today. He was elected Public Relations Director in 1970, served in that capacity until 1974, when he was elected to a term as Assistant General Overseer and Missions Director, then was elected General Overseer in 1976, and he also served 24 years on the board of 12 elders. So this is Jerome Walden. I've mentioned Clayton Lawson several times already. Going to forego his biographical information. It has not changed. Clayton was re-elected to the office of General Overseer in 1980. After having served from 1950 to 1960, he was re-elected 30 years after the first time he was elected overseer. He was re-elected to the office of General Overseer in 1980 and served in that capacity for 4 years. In 1984, Kenneth Eugene Massengill was elected to the office of General Overseer. K.E. Massengill was born April the 9th, 1940 in Harlan County, Kentucky, to Claude Massengill and Helen Foltz Massengill. He served the organization as a pastor, district overseer, pastor and district overseer in Kendrick, Kentucky for 10 years before he served as West Indies Island overseer in Jamaica from 1974 to 76. He was elected Assistant General Overseer and Mission Director in 1976 until 1980. And then in 1984, he was elected General Overseer for the next 4 years. And then after his tenure as General Overseer, he was elected to one more term as the Mission Director from 1988 to 1990. He served from 1990 until January of last year as the pastor of the Old Fort Church of God Mountain Assembly, retired there in January of 2015. He is finishing this year his 24th year on the Board of Elders. That's Ken Massengill. Wiley Jasper Walden was born in Louisville, Kentucky on September the 12th, 1941 to James Walden and Edna Douglas Walden. He was saved on New Year's Eve in 1962 in Cleveland, Ohio. 10 months later, he moved to Kokomo, Indiana to pastor the Bethel Tabernacle Church. In 1968, he was elected National Youth Director, served in that capacity for 6 years until he began pastoring in La Follette, Tennessee. He pastored there until 1984 when he was elected to the office of Assistant General Overseer and Mission Director. He served in that capacity for 4 years until being elected to the office of General Overseer in 1988 and served in that capacity until 1994 when he returned to pastor the church in La Follette, Tennessee, where he continues to pastor. He is in his 20th year on the Board of Elders at this time. Cecil Ray Johnson was elected General Overseer in 1994. Cecil was born October the 4th, 1939 in Valley Creek, Tennessee, to Horace Johnson and Anna Turner Johnson. He began pastoring his home church in 1974 and served in that capacity for 17 years until he was elected to the office of Assistant General Overseer and Mission Director. After 5 years in that capacity, he served 6 years as General Overseer, and he is currently pastoring again in Fondee, and he is concluding this year his 16th year on the Elder Board. And so these are our leaders during the period of time in which I want to focus on tonight and talk about education, to religiously educate our children. And I want to talk about the development of Christian schools within the Church of God Mountain Assembly. And first, I want to, just in case you're not familiar with the term ACE, I want to talk about Accelerated Christian Education. Donald and Esther Howard, pastor of a fundamentalist Baptist church in Garland, Texas, founded what is known as Accelerated Christian Education, or sometimes called the School of Tomorrow, in Garland, Texas in 1970. The ministry began solely upon God's leading to meet the need for an individualized, biblically based education for children. Their desire was to assist pastors and school staff in the Lord's command to bring up children. Deuteronomy 6 and 7, teach them diligently unto thy children's children, and talk about them when thou sittest in thine house, when thou walkest in the way, when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. Mr. and Mrs. Howard started the first learning center in their home, but in just 1 year they had 5 schools joining their staff training. By 1974, more than 500 schools across the United States had implemented the program, the curriculum that they developed. ACE has taken a conventionally styled textbook and then divided it into bite-sized workbooks called PACES, Packets of Accelerated Christian Education, which are full of self-instructional activities designed to develop thinking skills and to create mastery learning. And so the idea was, with their curriculum, with these PACES, that the student would be able to learn on their own, read what they needed to learn, then do the activities that were in the booklets, and then at the end of each booklet there was a test that they would take that had to be satisfactory passed before they went on to the next pace. And so it was designed in such a way that students were able to do it at their own pace. They were working on their own with the assistance of a limited staff. You didn't need a whole lot of staff in order to operate a K through 12 school. You could operate it with 1 or 2 learning centers, divided up maybe by school grades. But you could have 1 supervisor in the learning center with maybe a monitor or 2 to help answer questions and to allow the students to get up and score their own work at the scoring station, and then and so that they would be able to go through the program at their own pace with the help of limited staff. 5 core subjects and other electives are involved in the curriculum. The 5 core subjects are mathematics, English, literature and creative writing, word building, and science and social studies. That's 6, but English and literature and creative writing are together, so I apologize for that misunderstanding. But those 5 core subjects, and then there's also Bible reading and when they get into high school, other electives that the student can work on. And so with each of the paces are designed in such a way that the student is able to complete them within 2 or 3 weeks, depending on the school. There are checkups during the course of the pace where the student takes a mini quiz, if you will, to go over the concepts that they've learned up to that point, and then a self-review at the end of the pace before they take the exam. In order to pass the class, depending on the school itself, a minimum of 80% was required for a passing grade. Some schools, the bar was even higher, 90%. And so the school prided itself on raising the bar of academic standards. And so this is the ACE in a nutshell. Let's talk about the ACE in the CGMA. In 1980, a church in Brooksville, Florida, had opened a Christian school. That church and its pastor were received into the fellowship, the Church of God Mountain Assembly, at the 1981 General Assembly. Pastor Dale Watley, after coming into the Mountain Assembly, changed the name of the school from the Sailor Academy to the Mountain Assembly Christian Academy. The church used the ACE curriculum, and this was the first Church of God Mountain Assembly congregation to have a Christian school in the church. About the same time, Dr. Luther Whitehead, pastor of the Palm Bay, Florida church, felt the leading of the Lord to open a Christian school. And so after studying a different curriculum types, visiting the school in Brooksville, he decided to go with ACE as well. And so upon his completing the required training at ACE headquarters in Dallas, Texas, Reverend Mrs. Whitehead founded the Palm Bay Christian Academy and opened the doors of the Christian school for its school year in 1981-82. Within just a few years, the Whiteheads also opened the Lighthouse Bible College, an ACE-based Institute of Higher Education. And so the Church of God Mountain Assembly not only had a functioning K through 12, two functioning K through 12 schools, but also had a Bible college, if you will, available for the members and their families in Palm Bay, Florida. In January of 1981, Mission Director Jim Cox took a mission trip to Jamaica and Haiti. Accompanying him on this trip were Reverends A.G. and Roy Paget. In Florida, before they flew to the West Indies, they visited the school in Brooksville. Reverend A.G. Paget was pastoring the church in Muncie, Indiana. He had already begun to feel the Lord impress upon him the need for Christian education. His daughter Alicia had come home from school talking about some of the things that she had learned that weren't in the curriculum, I suppose, and talking about the way that she was treated at school. And so Brother Paget was looking for something an alternative for his own children. After having visited the school in Brooksville, learning about ACE, in the fall of 1981, the Sound the Alarm Christian Academy opened for enrollment. The 4-year television ministry that they had in Indianapolis, Indiana, was discontinued in order to shift the finances, the financial support into Christian education. This was the first Christian school in the Northern Conference. The school there in Muncie closed around 1994. Talks began in 1983 to open a Christian school in Jellicoe, Tennessee, in the Jellicoe vicinity. There was some discussion about the possibility of using the old Tabernacle building for the purpose of launching a Christian school. Pastor Ron Shelton had been was the General Secretary and Treasurer at headquarters, and he was talking to several local pastors about the particulars. At the General Assembly that year, a motion was made to allow the use of the Gibson Lawson building, the second tabernacle, the old tabernacle, for that purpose. After some discussion and some opposition, the motion was withdrawn. There was a school that was open nearby at the Fairview Church. Pastor James Ulrich was the pastor with the help of the Newcomb Church and some other churches in the area. The school was open. Reverend Bruce Dixon was the first supervisor of the school there. Funds were raised in order to help finance the school from neighboring churches. One of the churches that got involved in helping to support it financially was the church at Fundy. Pastor Cecil Johnson soon caught the vision, and he established the Fundy Christian Academy in 1984. Reverend James Cox, who had been serving as the Assistant General Overseer, whose term of office was coming to an end, he was instrumental in helping establish the first Christian school there in Fundy. And the school continues to function. The church, the school in Fairview closed in the early 1990s. By the way, Fundy Church or the Fundy Christian Academy is still in existence. Not long after helping bring the Brooksville Church into the organization, Dale Whatley and his family moved to Kokomo, Indiana. With some help from Brother Whatley, Pastor Ray Freeman of the East Side Church of God in Kokomo founded Christian Heritage Academy there in 1985, and the school was don't have it in my notes. I asked and got the information, and then I didn't put it in my notes. The school was closed there sometime in the recent past locally, but Christian Heritage International continues to operate for homeschool students and also in the mission work in Belize that they're involved with. Another Christian school opened in the city of Cleveland in 1986. The Aspinwall Church had operated a daycare in the inner city of Cleveland since 1967. And now, about 12 years later, they were opening their facilities to educate from the smallest up through high school seniors. Pastor James Walden opened the doors of the Aspinwall Christian Academy in the fall of 1986 with some help from the Donnellys. Sister Janie Hackler, who had been the missionary to Haiti. While she was in Haiti, she met Richard Donnelly, who was also a missionary to Haiti, and they got married in Haiti. And their oldest child was born in Haiti. When they relocated to the United States, they moved to Cleveland, Ohio, and they helped Pastor Walden start the Aspinwall Christian Academy. The school there closed in 2012. The year after the church in Cleveland was started, James Barty, pastor of the church in Salina, Ohio, opened the Myrtle Oric Christian Academy. The school closed in 1988, but reopened a year or two later, and as Salina Christian School, and it closed its doors for good in 2007-2008. Wapakoneta, Ohio, under Pastor Tim Barty, opened a Christian school there in 1999, and it closed its doors in 2006. And the last Christian school to be opened in Church of God Mount Assembly in 2000, Revelo, Kentucky, Pastor Leslie Gilreath opened a Christian school there in Revelo, and it continues to operate in this day. Here's 10 churches during a time period of about 20 years, 10 churches in the Church of God Mount Assembly that saw the need for Christian education, a Christian-based education, and started Christian schools within the organization during the time period in which we're talking. Two of them continue to operate in the Church of God Mountain Assembly. Let's talk about the Christian Education Department and the development of a national Christian education program in the Church of God Mountain Assembly. And we'll talk about a denominational Sunday school department first of all. The first Sunday school committee was founded, it was organized in 1912, way back, at the 6th General Assembly. Kurt Walker, Pete Huddleston, F.M. Thomas, W.M. Hicks, and J.F. Norman were appointed a committee on Sabbath schools. Their purpose was to create interest in and instruction on the Sunday school, to teach churches how to have a Sunday school. It's so odd for us to think about churches without Sunday schools, but many churches just did not have a Sunday school. And so in 1912, we created a committee to look into that purpose. In 1914, the assembly resolved that we have the pastors of the churches see over the Sunday school work and do their best to get them that are interested in that work and get them that are filled with the Spirit of truth as teachers. And so pastors were encouraged to organize Sunday schools in the local churches. In 1916, all churches were advised to have a Sunday school. In 1919, there was a resolution that made it a requirement that each local church shall maintain a Sunday school. And so that's still a part of our bylaws until this day. The need for a Sunday school. In 1919, that same year, the first Sunday school convention was held. There was a motion made that we adopt the resolutions on Sunday school offered by the Church of the Lower Elk Valley. The Jellicoe Church submitted a resolution on Sunday schools, said we, the Church of God, Sunday school at Lower Elk Valley, will offer our service to establish or organize Sunday schools in the bounds of the assembly where there is no Sunday school and where people want a Sunday school and want us to help them in the good work. As we feel the need of teaching and training the people, both men and women and children, to know the Scriptures as they are written in the Bible and to teach and bring up children in the Sunday school as God would have them to be taught, that they may withstand the cunning craftiness of Satan. There's kind of phraseology that you fell in love with, Colton, right? Amen. The cunning craftiness of Satan. Be it resolved that we ask the assembly to consider the work of the Sunday school in its order of business to the end that we may become established throughout the boundary of the Church of God. Be it resolved that we ask the Sunday schools to meet in conventions as much as twice a year. That we ask the cooperation of the churches and that the assembly impress upon the delegates from the churches to teach and advocate Sunday school work. This is done by order of the Sunday school when in session. And so the first Sunday school convention was to be held at the Jellicoe Church, Lower Elk Valley Church, in May 1920. And the idea was that those who had organized the Sunday school in Jellicoe, they would be willing to go to wherever, any churches within the assembly, and help them set up and establish a Sunday school. To draft teachers, to teach them what to do, how to have a Sunday, how to conduct a Sunday school, and make it a vital part of the church. By 1925, several churches began to report on the progress of their Sunday school program. The Sheep Creek Church had 4 classes. They averaged in Sunday school 30 people. The Jellicoe Church had 6 classes. And not counting visitors, they averaged 129 in Sunday school. They said they typically would open with singing and good music and then prayer, and then classes would recite from the New Testament. After classes, a good many read Scripture from memory, and then each class has a penny march for the purpose of getting up money to give the school a treat at Christmas time. They raised money in a penny march. They raised money for Christmas treats. And so Gilbert Weaver was the Sunday school superintendent of the Jellicoe Church, and it continued through the years to be one of our strong Sunday schools. The following year, the Saxton Church reported averaging 27. Fondy Church reported averaging 64. Jellicoe was averaging 135 in Sunday school. In 1927, the Emlyn Church, Elk Valley, Saxton, Little Wolf Creek, Shelburne Church, Fondy, Jellicoe, and Aegis churches were reporting averaging, having Sunday schools. 1928, there were 15. 1929, 16. 1930, 19 churches were reported as having Sunday schools. There was a committee that was established that year to go and see about the churches that don't have a Sunday school. We still have a handful of churches that weren't having Sunday school, and bring back a report to the elders why they weren't having Sunday school. And so J.M. Laws, George Kidd, and Gilbert Weaver were appointed to that end. The emphasis on Sunday school. In 1931, state Sunday school superintendents formed a committee. Each state had a Sunday school superintendent. Together they made up a national Sunday school committee, that was established that year to look after the work of the Sunday school in their state. Now the following year it was modified, changed around, said instead they appointed as many as two. They appointed, a state. Superintendents of the Sunday School Committee, or Committee of Sunday Schools, was created in 1931, and in 1932 they shifted it to where we had one in each state that made up the committee. And so they were appointed to go around and check on the status and encourage in the work of the Sunday school within their state. Kurt Walker was the Sunday school evangel for Georgia. Felder Miracles and May Johnson for the state of Kentucky. J.M. Laws, Felder Miracles and May Johnson were helping Kurt Walker in Georgia. J.M. Laws, with the help of Joe Jones and Kim Moses in Kentucky. Gilbert Weaver, with the help of Matthew Douglas and Louis Baird for Tennessee. For Ohio, R.D. Litton with Ernie Yeary and Francis Lawson helping him. And in Indiana, Drew Stanifer, along with Thomas Wood and Paul Robb. For the state of Michigan, Emmy Woolen with James Mays and Jess Allen. For Florida, the Bartow Church with the Cedar Key Church were the only Sunday schools there, and they were looking after their works. So these state Sunday school evangelists would travel to the churches, helping to organize and promote the Sunday school. And so through the years, J.M. Pruitt, Lee Cadell, Gilbert Weaver, J.A. Enix, V.L. Akins, Alvin Black, R.N. Ballinger, Willis Yeary, Lewis Birdwell, Glenn Spurgeon, Sam Cadle, M. Bailey, Clyde Pierce, A.A. Snipes, and J.W. Johnson served in these capacities in their various states as Sunday school evangels, and the purpose of promoting Sunday school and having conventions and teaching churches about Sunday school in the work of their state. In 1932, there was a motion at the assembly that year that Gilbert Weaver serve as the Mountain Assembly's Sunday School Committee man. And he'd been the Sunday School superintendent there in Jellicoe. He was challenged with the job of visiting as many Sunday schools as possible, organizing Sunday schools where there are none, and assist any way that he can, and bring a report to the next year. The next year, he reported to having 2 conventions. He organized 1 Sunday school and visited 6 others. So throughout the 30s, and there was as many as 1938. There were 5 different Sunday school conventions, and the idea was the Sunday schools would meet together. In the same way that local schools, that public high schools or public elementary schools would meet together in their districts and have district competitions or district get-togethers or district field rallies or field days or whatever, that the Sunday schools would meet together and promote each other in Sunday school. Many of the attendance records of a lot of our churches were set during this time in a Sunday school convention, because they'd have them on Sunday. And in one church, several churches would dismiss theirs, and they'd all go to convention and have their meeting together in that one place. These kinds of, this mentality continued through the 1940s. The attendance record at Middlesboro, for example, was set in 1949 when one of these kinds of conventions with groups at Henderson Grove and other churches coming together in Middlesboro and having one joint Sunday school together, filling the church up and creating a nice historic photo day and boosting some attention in that Sunday school. By 1939, practically all the churches reported having a good Sunday school in their letter. And so by 1940, the move was that we don't need Sunday school evangelists for the coming year. The Sunday schools seemed to be established. Each church was moving that direction. Let's talk about Sunday school curriculum. In 1925, there was a motion made that we advise all of our churches that they use the Bible only in their Sunday schools and not any literature. The Bible's the only curriculum that you need to teach from the Bible. Of course, we're talking about the King James Version of the Bible. Teach from the Bible. 1932, there was a move to modify that to allow the Sunday schools that the little folks could use Sunday school cards. But others used the New Testament King James Version. And so the same year, 1932, there was also a move that all of our Sunday schools in each church begin their lesson the first Sunday in January, 1933, with the first chapter in St. Matthew. So that each church would be studying the same thing each week. And if for some reason a Sunday school was missed, they'll make up 2 chapters the week that they come back, and to keep everybody in line with the same. In 1933, they actually came back and they said, you know what? Let every Sunday school select the lessons from any chapter that best suits the need of the Sunday school. So it really makes me curious to see how that played out. But in 1946, the restriction against the Bible only was dropped, and churches were allowed to use Sunday school literature if they chose to. The Sunday school cards for the card class had been permissible since 1932, but in 46 the other classes were allowed to use Sunday school literature if they so chose. With the creation of the National Young People's Endeavor and the National Youth Director in 1948, the national Sunday school work fell under the jurisdiction of the Youth Department. And so we talked a little bit last week about the National Youth Director. The reason that after 1948, in the 40s, the Sunday school, the National Sunday School program and the attention to Sunday school from the denomination itself began to die down was that the National Youth Department undertook that, and they promoted Sunday school and helped teach in Sunday schools. Now, in 1956, the Office of National Sunday School Superintendent was created. Lawrence Redmond was appointed to the position. Charlie Geary was his assistant. Their duty was to promote Sunday school and arrange for conventions. The following year, the office was deleted, and the responsibilities of Sunday school promotion returned to the National Youth Director. And so 1-year experiment, and they said, let's give it back to the National Youth Director. Let's talk about the National Christian Education Department as we understand it. We talked last week about the National Youth Department, and the Sunday School Director, the National Sunday School Department was under the National Youth Director. That was part of his duties. We talked last week about the purchasing of a campgrounds near Hillsboro, Ohio, in Highland County, Ohio, and the development of that campgrounds. When the Assembly decided to build a campgrounds on our property near Hillsboro, the job of building that campgrounds and developing that campgrounds was resting almost exclusively on the shoulders of the National Youth Director. And so trying to build, the first youth camp was held in 1976. He'd been spending that year building campgrounds. 1976, he continued to develop and build and to build the camp, building the buildings that are there. I mentioned very briefly last week in the question Brother Matt asked about the creation of the Office of Second Assistant Overseer in 1978 and Northern Conference Overseer. And he would live at the campgrounds, and part of his unofficial duties was helping to develop and maintain the campgrounds near Hillsboro. But in 1977, with the focus of Sunday school shifting toward all the focus of the National Youth Director being focused to building a campgrounds. That's a lot of work to do. Brother Carl Pruitt who was Sunday school superintendent in Detroit, Michigan, working with Pastor Paul Grubbs. Sunday school was Brother Carl's passion. Brother Carl served in every capacity in the church that you can. I mean, he served in every job that was available in the church, but he was serving as Sunday school superintendent. Always had a burden for Sunday school. I mentioned his father just a few moments ago. His father, J.M. Pruitt, had been one of the Sunday school evangelists, Sunday school evangels from the state of Kentucky. Sunday school always been a part of Brother Carl's life. And so he saw the need to have the Sunday school have a separate emphasis and somebody else to assume the duties, where the Sunday school could get the emphasis that it needed and take some of the burden, alleviate some of the responsibilities of the National Youth Director, especially during the time in which he was going to be developing the campgrounds. And so Brother Pruitt submitted a resolution in 1977 to create the office of National Superintendent of Sunday Schools. And just simply said, we shall have a National Superintendent of Sunday Schools elected by the General Council for a period of 2 years. He shall serve on a non-paying basis, but should be paid actual expenses from the Sunday school treasury. His duties shall be to develop and promote Sunday school programs and literature for the local churches, to teach churches how to have an effective bus ministry, to hold one Sunday school convention each year with classes on the various methods and ways of teaching and building Sunday schools. Each church shall send to headquarters an offering each month for Sunday schools. The General Secretary and Treasurer shall be the treasurer for the Sunday School Department. And so Brother Pruitt submitted this resolution, and I talked to him on the phone last week about it. He's recalling just some details that the Bible, that the minute book doesn't give. But he said, really, there wasn't a whole lot of discussion. Certainly wasn't any opposition, and the move passed right away. Now, who do you think was nominated for Sunday School Superintendent? Brother Pruitt was nominated for Sunday School Superintendent, but he hadn't brought a resolution to create for himself a job. He saw a need, and he declined. Henry Taylor had been serving as Sunday School Superintendent and as Director of Bus Ministry for the Town Street Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. Town Street Church was averaging about 400 in Sunday school at the time, due largely to the success of the bus ministry. I think at one time I want to say they had 10 or 12 buses going throughout the city of Cincinnati on a regular basis, bringing in children for Sunday school. Now, who better to serve as the first National Sunday School Superintendent? I've said the job, in a lot of ways, was tailor-made for Henry Taylor. And so he served as the National Sunday School Superintendent, and right away began organizing Sunday school conventions, meeting together and bringing in teachers to help teach in building a Sunday school. Are you familiar at all with Paul Pano's ministry as soon as he got in Fort Wayne? Back in the 70s, maybe it's before your time, Matt. I'm an old man. But I know Paul Pano was one of those first speakers at a Sunday school convention, big church and big Sunday school in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Brother Taylor brought him in and used him to help teach other churches about creating Sunday schools. In 1980, James Barty, now pastoring in Kokomo, Indiana, was elected to a 2-year term to serve as the National Sunday School Superintendent. In 1982, Kokomo, Indiana, the other church in Kokomo, Pastor Ray Freeman was elected to serve in that capacity. The following year, the office of National Sunday School Superintendent was changed. The name was changed to the National Christian Education Director. And so the Sunday School Department became the National Christian Education Director. I mentioned by this time we got 4 or 5 Christian schools in the Church of God Mountain Assembly. Brother Freeman was getting ready to start a Christian school in Kokomo. He saw the potential for the office to include more than just Christian education on Sunday mornings, but really on a daily basis, 6 days a week, the opportunity to religiously educate our children. Another thing that happened during this same time period is in 1983, the Board of Elders met in Cincinnati, Ohio, in a special Board of Elders meeting to discuss the possibility of changing the requirements for a ministerial candidate for ordination. And Brother James Cox was the Assistant General Overseer. Brother Ron Shelton was the General Secretary and Treasurer. They'd been talking together in the office about the possibility of adding some educational requirements for our ministers. They had been in conversation with Berean Bible Institute. That's the Assemblies of God's correspondence course for ministers. They've been talking with them about potentially using their curriculum as a correspondence course where the ministers could take courses that would help prepare them for ministry, qualify them for ministry. Both Brother Shelton, Brother Cox, both college graduates knew the benefits of higher education and saw the potential for the Church of God Mountain Assembly to be able to continue to develop and grow by training our men in the area of ministry. And so they had a list of courses that they'd like to see as required course opportunities to take for candidates for ordination. During the course of the elders meeting, some of the elders who, of course, didn't have formal education and didn't see the need in formal education, some of them really struggled with the idea of requiring such a thing for our ministers. Brother Freeman, as the Christian Education Director, was present at the meeting. During the course of the discussion, and the subject of the ACE curriculum came up, and Brother Freeman mentioned that it would be possible to use the Old and New Testament survey courses that ACE had developed for its high school students, freshman and sophomore classes, or also the possibility of their college level curriculum to use those courses as a requirement, so that at least the candidates for ordination would be required to take would be required to take a New Testament survey and an Old Testament survey that would give them a framework for understanding how the New Testament, Old Testament were organized, and how the development, the creation of them, and the basic content of the courses. And so the Board of Elders went that direction. They proposed a resolution to be added to the standard resolutions of the Church of God Mountain Assembly, that every candidate for ordination after the 1983 General Assembly, every candidate applying for ordination would be required to complete an Old and New Testament survey course approved by the Board of Elders. Now, that was the first course that was approved by the Board of Elders. And so, since that time, they've approved several others. And it's almost the place now where if you've taken a legitimate Old or New Testament survey course at a college, any college level class, for the most part, will be approved by the Elder Board. There was also at the same time a provision given whereby if a minister had taken an Old Testament survey course, a New Testament survey course, they'd already taken one, maybe at a college somewhere, they'd taken one at some school, and they could appeal, put that on their application, and appeal to take a mastery test. Brother Freeman, as Christian Education Director, created a mastery test where anyone having taken a course that hadn't already been approved by the Elder Board, they could take the mastery test, and if they passed that mastery test, then they would satisfy that qualification for the Old and New Testament survey. And so Brother Freeman drafted that, and then the Elder Board approved that course of study. The next thing that the elders recognize is that sometimes we have candidates that come into our organization from another organization. Sometimes we have men who come in from outside the Mountain Assembly who don't know anything about the Mountain Assembly, don't know much about its doctrine, don't know anything at all about its history. Sometimes we have candidates come in that are licensed with another group or that are ordained with another group, and so the Church of God Mountain Assembly adopted a policy whereby that we would match the credentials of groups that we fellowship with and what have you, other denominations. We would match certain credentials, but they discussed the possibility that we create some type of course that the men could familiarize themselves with the history of the Mountain Assembly and the doctrine of the Church of God Mountain Assembly. And so in 1984, Pastor Freeman began working on the pace that was modeled after the same kind of course that the ACE had created. It's modeled after the same kind of, where there's instructional information and then checkups and a self-test at the end, and then there's a final exam that is given. One pace that covers the history and the doctrine of the Church of God Mountain Assembly. And so in 1985, that course was approved by the elder board and was given to, again, it was designed for ministers coming into the Church of God Mountain Assembly from other organizations. In the mid-90s, there were some questions that were asked about who was required to take the History and Doctrine course. The headquarters began issuing the History and Doctrine course to every candidate who applied for New Testament survey. So if you took New Testament survey, a 13th pace would be sent to you on the History and Doctrine of the Church of God Mountain Assembly. And so there was some question about whether or not that course was required. The headquarters was sending it to the ministers. And so eventually, the Church of God Mountain Assembly, the elder board, somebody said, I can't remember I can't remember who submitted it now, but the idea came from the question out of the delegation: is it required? And eventually there was a resolution submitted that would be added to the standard resolutions that every candidate applying for ordination would be required to take the History and Doctrine course of the Church of God Mountain Assembly, so there wouldn't be any confusion about who, were just people coming in from every candidate was required to take Old and New Testament survey and the Church of God Mountain Assembly History and Doctrine course. Brother Freeman wrote that course in 1985. It has been modified very slightly through the years. Just maybe just adding, updating the men who've served in the capacities as general overseer is about the only thing that's been done to that particular course itself. And there's a lot of things that have changed in the church. Of course, there's 35 years of history, but there's a lot of things that have changed in the doctrine. In 1986, Henry Taylor was re-elected to the office of Christian Education Director. He would serve in that capacity for the next 14 years. I mentioned our leadership training conventions. Of course, he began launching some training conventions, and then in 1977. But by this time, the working relationship that took place in the 1980s, I mentioned the possibility of a merger with the International Pentecostal Church of Christ. We began to work together. When we couldn't work out a merger and join the two groups, we said, well, what we can at least do is continue to fellowship with one another. And we worked out an agreement where we would exchange ministerial credentials, exchange pastors, where if we had a minister that had credentials in the Mountain Assembly living in a particular area where the IPCC had a church and they needed a pastor, that he could fill in temporarily or could fill in or be elected pastor of that church, or vice versa. And so there was a working relationship with the IPCC. And so during that time, Brother Taylor, Brother Freeman, Brother Taylor began to work out joint leadership conferences, a joint Sunday school convention every March that eventually would be called Leadership 2000. and then Leadership 21 after the 21st century come along, or right before then. And then also in the fall of the year, continuing to work in a convention, a joint leadership conference with the IPCC, Pentecostal Free Will Baptist, and the Congregational Holiness Church. The fall convention continues unto this day. Right now, the last several years have been held in Pigeon Forge. The joint Sunday school convention in March died out just a few years ago. It was held for the longest time at Kings Island at the convention center there. One of the other things Brother Taylor, during his tenure, began to express a burden for a children's home, an orphanage in the United States. We had orphanages in India. We had orphanages in Haiti. We had children's home in Jamaica. Brother Taylor began to feel a burden for a children's home in the United States, and so he brought it to the attention of the General Assembly in 1994 that the Church of God Mountain Assembly reserve excess funds for Christian education, that we reserve the excess funds for the purpose of starting a children's home in the United States. Now, this is important because for the first 17 years that we had a Christian education department, the treasury of the Christian education department was the general fund. And so all but one of those 17 years, the Sunday school brought in more money than it spent. And so there was a surplus every year of Christian education funds that just went back into the general fund. And so Brother Taylor created, or brought a motion to create that resolution for the purpose of looking into launching a children's home in the United States. And the following year, that was 1994, that we created a Christian education separate account for the Christian education department for the purpose of using excess funds to launch a children's home in the United States. The following year, there was a motion brought to the floor by Glenn Rowe, who had just recently been appointed to the board of directors and as a trustee of the Children's Home in Barberville, Kentucky, the Pentecostal Children's Home in Barberville. The Children's Home there in Barberville had been in some financial straits, and so they were looking for help outside of the fellowship that for so many years had undergirded it. And so they looked to the Church of God Mountain Assembly. Brother Rowe's church at White Rock had already begun to support them financially. And that year, the Pentecostal Children's Home modified its bylaws so that churches that belonged to an organization for the first time could participate and be a part of the board. They could be on the board of trustees and also be a part of, and also be on the board of directors for the Children's Home. So Brother Rowe had already been appointed to the trustees and been appointed to the board of directors. His church was already supporting, and basically what it boiled down to is they were looking for $3,000 a year from the Church of God Mountain Assembly, and with that $3,000 per year support, they gave to the Church of God Mountain Assembly 10 trustees on the trustee board of the Children's Home. And so 1 year after Brother Taylor made that move to look into the possibility of starting a children's home, there was an the children's home had been established for 40 years, I guess, or maybe longer, the possibility of partnering together with a work that was already going. And so the assembly voted that year to accept the conditions of that term and began partnering together with the Pentecostal Children's Home in Barberville, and the move to start our own was the brakes were put on it. Let me say one thing about it. Since 2003 or 4, the Children's Home in Barberville, I think, has modified their bylaws since that time to where the churches that belong to a denomination are not permitted to have trustees or not permitted to be on the board of directors. And so the Church of God Mountain Assembly, while our bylaws still say that excess Christian education funds, we will send up to $3,000 per year to the children's home in Barberville, there was in 2003 we'll think of the word that we put on that, a moratorium placed on that resolution that year, that until such a time as the bylaws are amended, so rather than just taking it completely out of our, I think there were some things that were still up in the air. There were some leadership changes and what have you in the children's home in Barberville, and so we still have on the books a bylaw that says we will send those funds to the support of the children's home, but there's a moratorium on that currently on that bylaw, to where the effect of it is not been put into place. And the idea is that at such a time when that moratorium is lifted, that we will go back to sending the funds just like we say that we will. In the year 2000, Tim Barty, pastor of our church in Wapakoneta, Ohio at the time, was elected to the office of Christian Education Director. At this time, during this tenure, Brother Barty, by tenure of his office, because there was a vacancy in the administrator's position of the International Institute of Ministry, that I'll talk about in just a moment, because there was a vacancy in the administrative position, he assumed the duties of the administrator of the International Institute of Ministry. But Brother Barty has also held district training seminars and providing leadership resources to our pastors through a website and in the Gospel Herald with leadership material. Today we continue. I mentioned the conventions that we continue to support it. So let's move forward. Let's talk about the International Institute of Ministry. We'll talk about a college, if you will, developing future leaders for ministry. Let me say something about the value of education. First of all, in the 1970s, the Church of God Mountain Assembly, for the first time, began to have members and ministers who were college graduates, and so the value of education began to be emphasized and was important. In 1978, Pastor James Earl Pruitt of the Church of Milford, Ohio, launched the Central Christian Ministries Training Institute. Brother Pruitt had been to Lee College and had studied there. He did not graduate, but he came back to Cincinnati, and he went to Cincinnati Bible College and finished the third year of work there. Of course, Cincinnati Bible College, I think, is a Methodist institute, and the fourth year was all about debate. It was about being able to defend your doctrine. And Brother Pruitt kind of discontinued his education because the value of pursuing learning how to debate Methodist doctrine wasn't nearly as valuable as some other things that he had going on at the time. But he recognized the value of higher education. And so in order to train workers and teachers in our churches and ministers, Brother Pruitt launched the Central Christian Ministries Training Institute, offering a variety of ministry-related or Bible-related topics. This was launched at the Town Street Church in Cincinnati as one of our as one of the places where the classes would be held. Now, Brother Pruitt was elected that year to the office of Second Assistant Overseer, Northern Conference Overseer, living at the campgrounds, and began work helping to develop and maintain the campgrounds. And so when his shift focus from being a local pastor, having the time to coordinate this cooperative effort with others in the area, the Central Christian Ministries Training Institute didn't last long after that. I mentioned the relationship with the International Pentecostal Church of Christ, and as we begin to work with the IPCC, I talked about how 1976 the Pentecostal Church of Christ and the International Pentecostal Assemblies come together to merge. we had already had a relationship with the PCC. We didn't really have much of a relationship with the IPA, but the International Pentecostal Assemblies in 1919, Pastor Paul and Hattie Barth in Atlanta, Georgia, had founded Beulah Heights Bible College. And they were pastoring in the International Pentecostal Assemblies. And so once the IPA merged with the PCC in 1976, the International Pentecostal Church of Christ assumed control of the school. During the tenure of Jerome Walden and Kenneth Massengill, there was discussion about the possibility of merging together with the IPCC. And during this time, the Assembly in 1980 elected a school committee to meet along with the trustees to meet with Beulah Heights Bible College for the purpose of looking into the feasibility of participating with Beulah Heights, and then to report to the General Council. Now, along with the trustees, James Walden Jr., Bob Vance, Paul Yeary, Mike Cornelius, Jerome Walden, J.H. Douglas, and Glenn Rowe were the committee. This is the school committee and the trustee board. And so they met and talked with the Beulah Heights Bible College. Basically, we were given the opportunity to buy into Beulah Heights Bible College. For $100,000 over the course of 5 years, we were going to be able to partner together with, to buy ownership into, be partners with Beulah Heights Bible College. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. Unfortunately, part of it was $100,000. 1980 was a lot of money. It was a steep commitment. Some of our men felt like we couldn't afford that. And then at the same time, there were still plenty of men in the Church of God Mountain Assembly that did not see the value of higher education. And so, so we missed out on that opportunity. Several years ago, the Beulah Heights Bible College separated itself, became independent of the IPCC. Now it's an independent liberal arts college in Georgia. Continued to train, obviously, for ministry and for leadership. But one of the things that we did work out with Beulah Heights Bible College is that we had the opportunity through the IPCC and CGMA's partnership together. We had the opportunity for our students, for Church of God Mountain Assembly young people, to attend Beulah Heights Bible College and to go there at a tuition discount. And so 1982, Rick Massengill, Steve Price, Tim Bartee, and Robin Allen, the future Mrs. Bartee, went to Beulah Heights Bible College and began their higher education in that institute. At the 1995 General Assembly, Reverend Tim Walden made a motion of miscellaneous business to appoint a committee to study the feasibility of the Church of God Mountain Assembly launching a college. The committee selected, elected that year by the delegation, was Henry Taylor, the Christian Education Director, James Walden Jr., Jasper Walden, Michael Cornelius, and Michael Paget. And so those five, along with the executive board, Cecil Johnson, Lonnie Light, James Kilgore, and Dennis McClanahan, spent the year studying the feasibility of being able to launch a Bible college. That first meeting was held November 17, 1995 at the CGMA campgrounds. We invited special guest Dr. Sam Chand, who was the president of Beulah Heights Bible College at the time. Dr. Chand discussed with the committee the requirements for launching such an endeavor. He presented among the most important decisions to be made were the choice of an administrator, choosing a location, choosing a name. He recommended that we begin with a one-year focused institute, and that we use that year to establish feasibility. He said, you can't decide whether or not it's feasible until you actually get in there and start working. And so use that year to establish feasibility, and then have a one-year history, build some financial support, procure personnel, and put operations into place. The committee met again in December in Bantam, Ohio, and January at the Florida Camp meeting, twice in March at the Sunday School Convention at Kings Island, and again in June at the campgrounds. The committee determined that launching a training institute was not only feasible, but was necessary, and offered the recommendation to the General Council this resolution, that the CGMA International Institute of Ministry be created to provide a high-quality Christian education for the individual development of each student, for the responsibilities of Christian life as well as Christian leadership and service in the various Christian ministries. 4 areas of emphasis would be offered: pastoral ministry, world missions, Christian education, and church vocations. As a result of the opinion poll that was established by the committee, the most feasible location seemed to be somewhere in the vicinity of the campgrounds near Hillsboro, Ohio. The opportunity to use the dormitories, facilities that were already there, might serve well as an opportunity to bring students in. Also, the committee recommended to the General Council the creation of a board of directors, bless me, consisting of the elected officials. All the general officials would be part of the board of directors. The delegation also added to that to retain the exploratory committee. Those have been working for the last year to keep them on as a part of the board. They would hire an administrator paying $442 a week along with a $500 housing allowance. Give him the opportunity to hire a secretary at a board-approved wage. The administrator would be required to be an ordained minister with 5 years good standing in a Mountain Assembly, have a minimum of an associate's degree, working toward a bachelor's degree. He would be required to raise funds, to work as a development director, to promote the school, and to work with the board of directors to prepare for the opening of the school year. And so that year the Assembly adopted the proposal of the exploratory committee with the one stipulation that along with the board of directors, that the board of elders also be included in the interviewing and the hiring of a potential administrator. And so right after the assembly, letters sent out surveying pastors for potential instructors. The idea was we need to find out how many college-educated men and what their areas of specialty are in the Church of God Mountain Assembly. And so we're still trying to establish where is the best place to have this. If we've got a good group of college-educated men who are qualified to teach in an institute like this, that seems like wherever the most qualified teachers are would be the best place to have it. Now, at the same time, the elders and the school board would meet together on September 15th. They met, interviewed two men who applied, and the decision had been made. The Town Street Church was in a building project at that time. They were building a multi-purpose building adjoining their Sunday school that would be finished during that particular developmental year. And so the board decided that they would have the school at the Town Street facility, taking advantage of the new building. And the board hired that day James Kilgore, who had just completed his tenure of office as General Secretary and Treasurer. They hired him to be the administrator of the school. By January, Brother Kilgore had printed a brochure and an academic catalog, and had reported to the board that classes were set to begin on September the 4th, 1997. $825 a semester for a full-time student, $70 per credit hour for part-time students. They were offering a 1-year certificate of Christian ministries or a 2-year associate's degree in Christian ministries. And so in 1997, Brother Kilgore launched the IIM, International Institute of Ministry, offering classes in public speaking, Bible introduction, Old Testament survey, computer applications, New Testament Greek, intro to music, math, English composition, intro to missions, history of Christianity, and personal finance. And so with a handful of students, they launched the IIM. Brother Kilgore also, real early on, began launching IIM crusades. The idea was he would take students to participating churches where the students would have the opportunity to preach and promote the school among the young people in those churches. Brother Barty drove down to teach a class, brought several with him during that first year. I believe it was in the spring semester. He brought several with him from the Central Ohio District. Most of the students he brought with him. And so Brother Barty suggested the idea of the possibility of having a regional site where you could offer a class. Brother Barty said, I'm bringing 5, 6 people with me. It'd be easier for us to just meet and, just meet up there where we're at, meet and pick one. And anybody that wanted to take classes from Cincinnati, they could drive on up there, and it would save the expense of travel and reimbursement for the speaker, for the instructor. The board of directors at the time decided not to pursue regional activities and instead focused on the main campus. And so the following year, in 1998, fall of 1998, Brother Kilgore reported 14 students, 3 of which were full-time, and also the possibility of opening up the school for educational visas for foreign students to be able to come. In spring, there were 16 students, 4 of which were full-time, and we were still awaiting the arrival of foreign students. Brother Augustine's sons in Haiti were discussing the possibility of coming in to take classes in the United States. In fall of 1999, 18 different classes were offered, taught by Henry Taylor, Wayne Eisen, Kenny Ellis, Jim McInich, James Kilgore, Benny Hodges, Brother Leon Petrie, Brother James Wiley, Brother Mike Cornelius, Phil Russell, Gary Lape, and Robert Hughes. There were 20 students, 4 full-time, and 7 different classes. That year at the General Assembly, Kevin Human graduated from the IIM with his 2-year degree and was the first and only graduate of the school. In the spring of 2000, 15 students, 9 of which were preachers. 1 was full-time. Brother Kilgore also launched an informative website and also began having topic congresses where he would call together a panel to discuss particular topics of interest. And in the spring of that year, the board of directors began issuing guidelines for the administrator to set in stone the job duties and the qualifications that had changed and modified through the last 4 years. And so they looked to the administrator to be present prior to the class and after the class, be responsible for securing the property. He'd be responsible for having monthly staff meetings. On non-class days, they expected him to work on recruitment and promotion, to make an annual report. They wanted him to show substantial growth, 100% or more. For the next school year, the instructors were to receive their teaching materials at least 2 weeks prior to classes. He was required to attend assembly functions with an IIM booth set up to promote the school, to visit the Eastern Kentucky Pentecostal Association camp meeting in Richmond, to visit between 3 to 4 churches each month, and to host college days. And the board also proposed that they would have an annual review to review the process, the progress, and to review the job performance of the administrator on an annual basis. In June of 2000, the board of directors also authorized regional campuses. And so we said we'll have these regional campuses set up in places where there may be some interest. We'll also offer a featured class where we won't charge any tuition for the purpose of getting people here, boosting the attendance, and just get everybody here to see what it's about. We'll offer a class free of charge. In July of 2000, Brother Kilgore tendered his resignation, effective at the conclusion of the General Assembly. Part of that was just the feeling of the leading of the Lord, he said, and also he had assumed the pastorate of the church in Butlerville, Ohio. And so 2 significant things happened at the General Assembly in 2000. First of all, the resignation of Brother Kilgore, and second of all, Brother Tim Barty was elected to the office of Christian Education Director. And so Brother Light had been elected General Overseer that year. He announced his intention of receiving resumes, meeting on August the 25th to interview any potential resumes, those who would submit, who were interested. And in the meantime, the the direction of the IIM was placed under the supervision of the Christian Education Director. And so the one class, the featured class, was offered on the main site with 29 students. There were 10 who completed, 29 signed up, but 10 actually finished. And also regional classes in Piqua, Ohio with 10 students, Jellicoe with 8 students, Metamora with 5, and also there were several other places that were talking about the possibility of becoming a regional site. So that first year with regional sites, there were 37 courses completed by 29 students. So we had the most students ever by going regional. And also Old Fort, Middlesboro, Cleveland, and Michigan, as well as Oliver Springs, were making plans to adopt a regional site. So over the next 4 years, the regional sites continued to offer classes, primarily Old and New Testament survey, for the benefit of those that were seeking ordination. In the fall of 2002, Brother Lack proposed a reorganization of the IIM, appointing a task force to develop a 5-year plan in areas of purpose, philosophy, mission, goals, and objectives. He had appointed to that committee Brother Barty, Brother Roger Webb, who was the General Secretary and Treasurer at the time, Pastor Ray Landis, Michael Paget, who was the Assistant General Secretary and Treasurer at the time, and Mike Cornelius. In the fall of that year, in Cleveland, Tennessee, we had the opportunity, Brother Barty, Brother Paget, Brother Mike Cornelius, Brother Jim Cox, and Brother Al Newton met in Cleveland, Tennessee with Dr. Dwayne Pyatt, who was the coordinator of the Church of God School of Ministry. And the Church of God had just launched this School of Ministry program that was intended with video curriculum, intended to instruct those who were interested in becoming bishops in the Church of God Mountain Assembly. They'd be required to complete a 39 credit hour course, or maybe it's 40 credit hours of course. And we went down to see their program, to meet with them. The Church of God was offering us the opportunity to participate in that program. They were going to take the videos, and the videos were being taught by professors at Lee and by professors at the Pentecostal Theological Seminary, by former general overseers. All of the instructional material was solid. It was good Bible-based. And the way it would work was you would gather together and you would watch a 30-minute video teaching series, and then you would have group discussion among those that were there. So you'd have a facilitator watch the teaching by Dr. Whoever, and then you'd discuss those things and work on the assignments, and then complete those programs. We were given the opportunity to be a part of that, and I'd like to say buy in, but they were offering to us without any cost. They were going to give us the DVDs. They were going to bring our general overseer down to Cleveland, Tennessee, to the general office. They were going to video a promo from the general overseer of the Church of God Mountain Assembly, so that the DVDs that we purchased to distribute among our ministers would all have an introduction from the general overseer of the Church of God Mountain Assembly, the same way that the Church of God videos had an introduction from the general overseer of the Church of God. We were given that opportunity to buy into that without any cost whatsoever, except for the expense of buying the DVDs, the duplication, if you will, of the DVD set. The task force met in the spring Northern National Youth Rally in Piqua, Ohio. The spring of that year, there were spring of 2004, there were 4 extension sites. And the distractions of the 2003-2004 assembly year, which I will talk about in the second session next week, the distractions of 2003-2004 put most of the IIM on hold. And so the IIM, I think there's still some references to it in our minute book, but it doesn't function the way that it did. Let me just mention 2 other things tonight as post-IIM educational opportunities. In the wake of the demise of the IIM, Brother Barty began shifting the focus of ministerial training toward advancement in ministry opportunities, holding shorter seminar-style classes and workshops instead of a 16-week semester. Brother Barty said it's easier to get 8 weeks Let's have shorter classes, ministry opportunities, seminar-style workshops developed as needed. Also fundamental was the creation of a website with articles and sermons and resources. CGMA is able to point you in the direction of a lot of leadership resources that will be of help. And in 2015, the Ministers Training Program began as a joint venture between the Youth Works for Christ and the Christian Education Departments. Initially aimed at preparing young ministers, but then opened up to train all ministers. The most important feature was the mentorship with a pastor, aimed at preparing fields of study to be completed in a month. Each course would require 8 to 10 hours from the participant, may include lectures and reading assignments and interviews. Projects included pastoral care, funerals and weddings, preaching, preparation and delivery, spiritual disciplines, leadership, soul winning, church administration, ethics, conflict resolution, worship, youth ministry, the role of the second man, and other areas like this. And this is a program that is continuing to develop under the auspices of the Christian Education Department.